Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm aware that it's gonna be maybe a bit smaller crowd today, I think in a good way. So this is a webinar topic that, excuse me, my squeaky chair here at my office, that we kind of tossed together here about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, after reading through an association trend study. So I'm gonna kind of come back to that here in just a minute to kind of introduce why that's important for this demographic. But there were some kind of interesting findings on there, and that's kind of what led us to do this webinar. So again, we kind of threw it together last minute, but I think there were some important things that we want to kind of talk through. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at a high level with that introduction. I'm going to come back to introducing myself, and then we'll kind of jump into some of the main, 8 bullets or 6 bullets that we kind of can see here on my screen. But kind of how do we get to this point? So again, about 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, we read this association trend study. Now, looking at some of the names and people on this meeting, I know some of you are membership-based associations. You may have saw this. This is super, super relevant to you. With that said, some of the key findings and metrics and things that we saw within here are relevant to anybody running a scholarship, a grant program, a fellowship, a camp, right? Whatever it might be, any type of like application review-based program with highly sensitive personal information, and quite frankly, for life-changing opportunities. So this is a pretty comprehensive, long study. We can share it out afterwards, and you guys can kind of read through this. It was hosted by Community Brands, who's a really great organization providing a ton of tech and software to mission-driven organizations, many of which I may be using. Long story short, though, I'm going to kind of jump back to my topics here today. There are some key findings here that I thought really just stood out, and it kind of tells a story of why we built Reviewr in the very, very first place. So kind of jumping ahead here just a little bit, we try to focus on maybe 4 or 5 of the bullets here. And the first one that stood out to me was that over 75% of organizations are prioritizing the applicant experience in their programs. That's a core finding, because if you think through like what a scholarship program would look like, or for those of you on this webinar doing multiple things, grants, award programs, etc., you're aware that your applicants are one of maybe three stakeholders that make up your program, right? You have people applying; those are applicants. You have an operation team, and then on top of that, you've got some type of review and selection team. Oftentimes they're volunteers, board members, committee members. And so when I read through this second bullet here, which is 63% of organizations are focusing on improving their internal operations, I thought that would be the highest number, right? It's very easy for us to focus on ourselves. How do we create operational efficiencies? How do we make our own lives easier? I get it. You're mission-driven organizations are wearing a lot of different hats. So how do we make your lives easier? But at the end of the day, you make up maybe 1/3 of the program. So I was a bit surprised to see that, at least here in 2025, in the upcoming year, organizations are placing an emphasis on the experience for people besides themselves. And I love to see that. On top of that, there's also a really growing concern for data security and privacy. I would argue that this metric of 66% is significantly higher for those of you running scholarships. The nature of your programs, you're dealing with very, very personalized, sensitive financial potential information about candidates, and so that has to be at the very forefront of our conversations. We also are all in agreement that very manual processes are said to be an operational burden, but also they're portraying a negative impact on your organization. So the reason why I want to summarize some of those elements, I think the main goal of this study here was trying to get a better understanding of like how do people feel about their internal tech stacks and how they're creating both efficiencies, but also how are they trying to elevate the experience and engagement levels of all the participants to their programs. And so I kind of pulled out these items on my own, which was basically, here's the facts, yet most of the organizations in that study feel as that their current tech stacks are either average or they're lacking, or a common trend that we've heard is it's not modern. A lot of the processes that go into running a scholarship program consist of a wide variety of processes. So for some of you, it may be very manual physical paper, so binders being sent in of applications, downloading of documents, a lot of emails, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of fillable Word documents, or you might be using other platforms and tools out there that weren't intended for scholarship management. So using like AMSs, databases, you might be using like Monday.com, right? All these like efficiency tools that work for some of the components that go into a scholarship that create a whole bunch of negative impacts down the road. And so I say we put a strong emphasis here on the applicant experience, yet operationally speaking, we only focus on ourselves. So how do we kind of open up and broaden these campaigns to focus on the broader picture, not just ourselves? There's also kind of an interesting number here that over 65% feel that data security and privacy is a concern, but how are we addressing that without using dedicated software? So kind of coming back here a little bit, I'm going to jump into the platform in just a moment, is my introduction. So again, we built Reviewr because of those studies and those findings. So we lived in your shoes. We are part of these funding opportunities as a review committee member. So we went through the entire process of having physical binders mailed to us. We were sent emails, Dropbox links, and surveys. We were told to go to Google Drive, download an application, go answer a series of questions in a spreadsheet, send it back to us. We lived that life. And over the years, we heard two really horrifying things come up. Number one is that they started to see, submissions or applications that either would go to spam filters, or they would submit it in a wide variety of formats, and they would lose information or get disconnected. And then when a team would sit down and go through judging review selections, they weren't even reviewing all of the candidates that intended to apply. So you have very deserving submitters or applicants that never even got included in the selection. Right? Like how heartbreaking is that? We're mission-driven organizations, yet we're not even reviewing all the potential candidates. There's somebody that's going unfunded because we never got their app, right? Like, that just can't happen. Number two is we start to see review committee members making very clear biases in their selections. They knew who the applicants were, they had personal biases towards either them or they knew their friends and their family. And when they sat down and awarded scholarship funds, they purposely left them out because they just didn't like them, right? Again, that just physically can't happen. So that kind of comes back to this study here, is that we're all in agreement here that we want to prioritize the applicant experience. Obviously, we want to create efficiencies. Nobody loves spreadsheets. Data security, privacy, compliance is a concern. Yet, based off of that study, very few of us are actually doing anything about it. And that's kind of where we want to come in today. It's kind of like, how do we take all these moving parts and these pieces and really change the game? I try to emphasize here, it's not about the energy, it's about the impact. And so how do we then start to incorporate all the core components that go into a scholarship and then work backwards and basically ask ourselves, hey, with how we currently run our application structure, with how we currently manage the operations, how we currently do a judging and scoring, does this align with an applicant experience? Does it make my life easier? Is it making the process fair, non-biased, and compliant? Are we going to get ourselves into issues in the road in the future because of reporting purposes? And if we ever have a question mark or an answer is yes, then we have to revisit our tech stacks that we're utilizing. So what I wanted to do at this point is kind of run through, I think, like the 5 core components that go into a scholarship, and kind of look at like what we might be leaving out there, things we might be missing. Because I think a lot of times, again, right now we're looking at how do we enhance the applicant experience for engagement. There's more to that party, right? Like, it's not just the applicants. What about the references? What about the parents, right? This is broadly speaking, because there's a lot of different processes and workflows on today's webinar, but how do we kind of think about all of them, not just the submitter? Because you may be using a Google form, right? And I'm not trying to put people on blast or call you out. And a Google form from a public facing perspective looks good, right? An applicant goes there, they're online, they're filling out an application. They think that that's a very modern process. However, once that Google form gets submitted, we all know what happens next. You're downloading, you're exporting, you're recompiling, you're going to lose information along the way. You physically can't redact any personal identifying information from the review team. So again, just because we put on this kind of like a charade of being a modern online submission process, we have all these negative impacts that come into play. So with all that said, like, what does a full-blown scholarship portal look like? That way you can kind of visualize, where you can elevate the experience and the operation side of things. So from an applicant perspective, I think the main goal that we have to focus on here is how do we lower the barrier? At the end of the day, anybody offering a scholarship, you are literally changing people's lives. Now, to different extents, different types of opportunities, I get that, but people are going to you for funding to change their life. That's a matter of a fact. And so how do you lower the barrier for them so they're less concerned around, did you get my information or not? Are they going to time out? Are they going to get lost along the way? And empower them to focus on creating the best version of themselves to set them up for success. On top of that, you are collecting some key details that you need to make very informed data-based decisions, such as their essays or their financial needs. And then the third component to that, which is a very kind of common emerging trend, is how are you collecting references? I'm going to add a quick little note in the chat here of how many people collect references. So you can just acknowledge that with like a thumbs up or some type of emoji. But it's an emerging trend that I want to make sure that we address today because we can have the most efficient operational applicant experience ever, but then we pose a huge challenge with references. So what does this process look like? I grabbed one of my favorite forms in Reviewr, which is the Army Scholarship Foundation. I think they have a very well-structured application workflow. As you can see here, at its core, we have branding. So we want to make sure that we are at the forefront. We're creating cohesiveness between your web experience and the application process itself, right? You've got a strong brand, you've got a strong reputation. I mentioned beforehand that there was like a large percentage of people who feel like their current tech stacks and processes have a negative portrayal of them as an organization. That starts here, right? So we want to build consumer trust and confidence within the processes. From there, it drops us into the application structure. So this at its core is an essential component that you have to be incorporating into your scholarships. Whether or not you're using Reviewr or another vendor or another platform out there, you have to incorporate a concept called a profile. So the idea behind a profile is you're taking all the moving parts that go into this process: people, submission forms, file uploads, transcripts, references, judging and scoring, communication, ongoing data collection from the applicants, and centralizing them into one hub. You physically can't, collect forms through like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey or whatever those other form tools are, and then have the applicants who get selected for a scholarship send you an email 6 months from now, additional funds, right? You have to kind of keep everything consolidated. So in Reviewr, it's all about an experience. Applicants come in, they tell us who they are, they answer a series of questions, it drops them into the form. I'm trying to stay very broad here, but if you have a program that offers either multiple scholarships or you got very specific criteria to your scholarship, we want to kind of guide the applicant through the experience. We don't want to waste their time applying for something that they're not physically eligible for. At the same time, we want you to review a bunch of candidates that just physically can't, meet the needs of the program. So in this workflow, you can do a couple different things. We have some of our clients that will answer a series of questions, and then based on the results, the system would say, hey, you align with these 3 scholarships. Which of or all of them do you want to apply for? So we create opportunity, we create visibility that they may not have been aware of initially, or in this example, to answer a series of questions, and the system will say, hey, you know what, unfortunately, because you're not a US citizen or whatever, the reasoning is, you're not able to proceed on. Or it does say, hey, you are eligible, and then it drops them into the form. So it seems like very, very small things. But if our goal, 76% of you want to elevate the applicant experience, it starts there. Once they jump into the form, again, it seems like very small things. We want them to be able to save and log out. We want them to be able to work at their own pace, at their own time. We want you to be able to send them reminder messages. Again, it seems like a small thing, but the vast majority of the applicants apply in the last 36 hours. So how do you help them not forget? Should that be on you? Probably not. But again, we want to help them achieve success. So how do you identify those that have started these applications and haven't yet finished, send them reminder messages, and kind of help usher them along to make sure they get their apps in by a certain day and time? We'll come back to like data security and privacy here in just a little bit. As far as this form goes, I'll share this out again. I think it's a really well-structured application just in general. I think it does a really nice job capturing personal information and then helping build a narrative around the applicant. Because at the end of the day, some of you might have a lot of highly qualified candidates and you don't have infinite money, right? Nobody has infinite money. So how do you help differentiate one scholarship applicant from one another? Again, I think they do a great job of that by tying in 3 components. Number 1 is your academics. Number 2 is financial need, and then number 3 would be like personal storytelling. So in this example, they put in like who they are as far as their academics go, class rank, GPA, transcripts, they upload files. It does try to get a bit deeper into like outside of the classroom because everybody gets great grades. Tell us more about yourself. So what are your volunteer opportunities? Do you work while you're in school? Tell us more about your extracurricular activities, things like that. From here, it'll then jump us into financial need. So this is kind of a polarizing conversation where you have kind of 2 different schools of thought nowadays. You've got some scholarships that are purely financial need, right? They only are giving scholarship funds to those that have the highest need. Others don't care about that as much, and they focus more on personal storytelling, right? They want to have help a non-merit based scholarship. So in this example, they try to solve the problem of financial need, because sometimes, you focus on income because your family is a high earner doesn't mean that you're not still in financial need. So it kind of gets deeper into asking, like, okay, if you receive a scholarship, like, where are you going to go to school? What are you going to use the funding for, right? Tell us more about some of your anticipated expenses. If you didn't get a scholarship, how do you plan on funding this? Is it through personal loans, or, do you have parental assistance, or personal savings? Again, it seems like small things, but you can already start to build a story around somebody who, maybe a high earner, but they also have high expenses and there is no parental assistance. They're going to go and get student loans, versus somebody else who has low expenses and they have both parental savings and they have personal savings, right? So again, it tries to build a narrative. It tells us more about their expenses, and then kind of from a data security and privacy perspective, it's asking for 1040 information, so financial needs of the parents, as well as a FAFSA calculation. So I'm not sure how many of you are using the FAFSA SAI calculation. It's kind of basically a student aid index. It's a formal calculation that FAFSA does to kind of help tell you if their family is in financial need or not. So a lot of times the applicants will come back into Reviewr and then upload the results of that calculation. So again, the idea here is to use multiple sources for you guys to build a story around, are they in financial need or not. I want to kind of pause there because without knowing how every one of you runs your scholarships, if you are collecting anything on this page, personal information, financial information, FAFSA information, or any tax ID numbers, social security numbers, or headshots, we now have what I call student information, right? I know exactly who this person is. I know where they live. I know who their parents are. I know what they're earning. I know their jobs. We just put ourselves in pretty tremendous risk, right? And so 30% of scholarship applicants actually will not even apply for a particular opportunity because they're concerned around where their data is going to go. So it's absolutely essential that whatever tools and mechanisms you have in place, you're able to securely manage these deliverables. So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that today. Reviewr is a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant company. I just want to ensure that if you're collecting personal information, that you're A, protecting yourselves, and B, you're protecting the applicant, right? You're trying to build trust with them. The next component to this form, which is my personal favorite, is personal storytelling, right? So what better way to help an applicant differentiate themselves versus one another than personal storytelling? We are going to come back to this because one of the emerging trends that we started to see is literally applicants typing into ChatGPT some high-level information about themselves and then pasting in an essay prompt and having it write that for them. So how do we start to address that? And then the references. So because very few, if any of you, are collecting references based off of the note in the chat, I am going to kind of skip past this. Just note that we actually have a trigger built into Reviewr that will notify the reference, letting them know that they've been added, and then they would then click on a link to add the reference. Kind of plot twist to that is that we're very anti-reference letters at Reviewr. Reference letters are a better reflection of the person writing it, not who it's about. So instead, we want to incorporate these processes where the reference fills out a template. They then fill it out. It lowers the barrier for them. It'll merge their answers with the application form. That way, when you go to do a review and selection, the data process itself is very consistent. You're comparing apples to apples because you have the references all answer the same series of questions. So again, because none of you are really doing references, I could be wrong. I'll pause there, but I can kind of come back to that during a Q&A at the end. Long story short, though, once the applicant's done, they submit confirmation emails, thank you messages, etc. The thing I want to kind of do, though, is go back here to my presentation and talk a little bit about many of us are trying to prioritize the applicant experience. And I want to kind of use that keyword there, which is experience, right? Filling out built-in web forms, going through Google Docs, sending in emails with a bunch of downloadable documents and spreadsheets. Like, I don't even know if I can include that as an experience. And we have to put their experience at the forefront of absolutely everything. Number two is that we have to put the review team's experience number two, and then we want to save our own lives as number three. So let's kind of move on to some of that stuff. So second item on this list, that would be streamlining operations. So we just kind of presented a few different challenges. We got the scholarship process where we have all these applicants who are coming in, they're telling us about themselves, they're uploading their deliverables, they're uploading their files. How do we help you not have to go and download a bunch of stuff, export it, use a bunch of tools and vendors to kind of run this part of things? How do we help you on Wednesday nights when you should be focused on your families, not focusing on things like spreadsheets, right? There are so many moving parts to a scholarship program. I think a lot of times you think through, okay, we have an application process and then we review people, that's it. But kind of nested in between there is you have to monitor progress. You want to send reminder messages. You have to send updates and communication. You should be redacting personal information. We have to create these review workflows. Your program might be multi-phase. I actually saw the other day an organization that was using a platform kind of like Reviewr to run like 95% of their scholarships. And then if you get selected for a scholarship, they make you actually download into Word a fund disbursement form with social security numbers and then email it back to them. So like we literally got 95% of the way there, and then we lowered the experience, and then we just threw all compliance and data security out the window at the last 5%. So how do we help you cross the finish line with the full life cycle of managing a scholarship? So to kind of visualize that, we have obviously at Reviewr dashboard. So it's like your command center. But I want to kind of walk through some of the automations because again, generally speaking, and this is all based off of this trend survey, that the common tools that you're using are emails, spreadsheets, Google Docs, forms, and Dropbox links. So if we kind of come back to Reviewr, you now have a centralized hub to manage the entire life cycle of the program. You can track in real time how many dates and deadlines, where people are at within the process. You can send them built-in reminder messages. I'm a marketer, so I love to watch conversion rates. So I can see in real time as my deadlines approach who's done, who's not done, send them reminder messages, and then start to watch them in the last probably 12 hours, right? Finish up their applications. And then again, if somebody doesn't hit the deadline, I can actually see why, right? It wasn't that they had issues, it was the fact that they waited to the last minute. So it helps you have those tough discussions, right, with your candidates. This process then also allows you to very easily find your submissions. So a lot of this is going to be dependent upon your desired workflows. But we have this menu system. So again, you never have to physically go and find applicants, download them, export them. You basically get this menu of every one of your scholarship applicants. You can simply click on their name, then boom. There's how you can kind of visualize that profile concept. So we have Michael here. Michael is a scholarship applicant. I in real time can view all the content that we collected from Michael. I have short answers, I have essays, I have file uploads. I have absolutely everything centralized into one hub. You're also going to notice what seems like a small thing here, right? Which is your social security number. Number one is I don't recommend you collect social anyways. However, some of you will be. And so we have obviously all of the data security and privacy tools in place to encrypt it as well as lock it down and not allow people to see it. Communication wise, again, I don't want you then having to pick up the phone and call Michael, although there are some benefits behind that. But I want you communicating with people in your personal inboxes. So you can actually jump over to our question and comment section. You can one-to-one send direct communication to Michael. It stores that messaging in Reviewr. Michael can come back in, he or she can respond back. It keeps a nice tidy track record of all the activities. Maybe my team internally wants to collaborate. I can actually leave notes about a particular candidate that he or she can't see, but my team can. So it allows us to one-to-one collaborate with one another. I talked about the file uploads earlier on. So I think many of you would probably agree that when you're kind of going through a manual process, the hardest part is to take their scholarship application and then merge it with all their file uploads and then make multiple copies for the review team. So in this example, literally every deliverable we collected, from your file uploads to your images to your videos, all of them show up on the applicant's profile. When I press the view button, it actually embeds itself. So again, I use the term experience. I'm going to continue to use that term until we're tired of it. But if your team is a Mac user or they're on their iPads and you send them like a spreadsheet, they're going to struggle. So how do you create consistency amongst the experience is that these file uploads embed themselves. So I can toggle back and forth between the application form, a PDF, an image file, a spreadsheet, highly secure confidential data, right? All of it gets nested right on my applicant's profile. I never have to physically download it and leave the system. And the last kind of component here is supplemental forms. So for those of you who are collecting references, it'll actually show you a list of all the references collected or the transcripts. If you view it, it'll actually show you the content that was filled out. This is also going to be a great tool for those of you that want ongoing data collection from your applicants. So for example, if Michael was selected for a scholarship, you now need him to come back to do an update or a fund disbursement form or a thank you letter, one of the many things you might be collecting. He or she can just click add new, fill it out right smack dab on the page, and then it will add itself as a line item back to his profile. So Michael started day one with just an application. Day 361, it's now an application, it's 16 file uploads, it's fund disbursement forms, it's communication, it's judging and scoring results. Absolutely everything was just compiled into one centralized hub. So then kind of the next thing I want to kind of talk about here is, I think I talk about experience again, I'll keep using that term, is the second most important one, which is the review and selection team, because without them, we don't have a program. So there's some interesting facts that we've kind of pulled from some of these surveys. On average, a review and selection committee member cannot look at more than 15 scholarship submissions without their energy levels falling off pretty dramatically. That's a surprising number to me. It seems low, but we have the data to back it up. And so if that is the case, and you have 30 submissions, 50 submissions, 150 submissions, how do you ensure that the 131st submission got the same opportunity that the first submission got? So I want to kind of run through a couple of things here. Number one is, how do you create like these automations and these kind of structures? Number two is, how do you go about the redaction of personal identifying information? And then the next piece of that puzzle is, how do you leverage data for better decision making? So I'm gonna kind of lump all this together, because again, this is full circle of using a dedicated platform that has all the tools in place that kind of address these items. So from your operation perspective, everything starts with a concept called buckets. So we're going to kind of just play this game here. Let's just say you have 100 submissions and you've got like 3 different scholarships. What you can actually do is you can create these automations where you have 1 bucket per scholarship. As people are applying, the system will say, hey, Kyle applied to the fall scholarship versus this scholarship. And then as soon as they submit, it'll drop me into whatever bucket I belong to. That's one example. Another example might be, you've got 50 submissions, and you've got teams of 5. You can create 5 different review buckets. Each one has 5 people in it. Another example might be phases of review. Applications come in, there's a dedicated vetting team. From there, you take the top 50, move them on to phase 2, which might be a formal judging and scoring process. From there, the top 20 go on to phase 3, which is an interview phase. And then from there, the top 5 go on to a final selection. So there's many, many ways to configure this, but the end goal here is I want you to be able to take all of your scholarship applications and then create structure and categorization around them, but ultimately assign those submissions to a team for review. So in this example, it's structured based off of phases or workflows. But the way that this works is that you basically have a bucket full of applicants. And then what you can do is you can assign that bucket out to a team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into Reviewr, they're physically only going to review the submissions in whatever bucket you gave them access to. Once that submission goes on to like the final review bucket, you might have a totally different pod or a totally different team who's in charge of reviewing them. You can also have different dates and deadlines, different scorecards, all the mechanisms you need to run the program. Again, there's 3 core consistencies: an applicant experience, operation experience, and then review and selection experience. How do we address each one of them? So if I open this bucket up, it's actually going to show me a listing here of all of the applicants. So I got like 6 different submissions here. And then from there, I can do some pretty cool things. So I mentioned a little bit ago that on average, a review committee member can't physically look at more than 15 submissions. So what do? Well, what I would do is I would randomly assign out my submissions to my team in an equal and random manner to ensure that each person gets reviewed a certain number of times, but also each evaluator isn't scoring more than their own personal workload capacity. So what I could do is I could say, okay, let's bulk select these. And I want every applicant to get reviewed maybe no more than 3 times, but no less than 2. And or I want my review team to look at maybe no more than 15 people. So the way that would work is you would just assign it back out, and then boom, this will show you a list of all of your applicants or your review team. It shows you how many submissions they were assigned to evaluate and who those individuals are. So from your perspective, there's literally 0 manual work. And more importantly, there's no room for any human error. You're not pairing people up. You're not trying to figure out which applicants go to who. You don't have a team member that's going to review 150 submissions. You just use automation and tools to take your submissions and then assign it out. And if you want to modify this, you can still edit that, and you can on a one-to-one basis start to pair people up. Maybe there's a conflict of interest. Maybe that committee member decided to go on a last-minute vacation. You can still modify this as you please. The main goal here, though, is once that's done, to redact data. So I can kind of talk extensively about that. By no means is that a requirement. However, anytime your review team is reviewing an application where personal identifying information is either A, being displayed that's not relevant to the selection, such as a social security number, or B, if it could potentially sway their selections, we have to remove that from their point of view. So in Reviewr, we have all the tools in place to redact data from individuals. Once the review team comes into the system, they too get this menu. So they can physically see a list, right, of every submission that you want them to score. So again, from an experience perspective, historically speaking, this was done through Dropbox links, surveys, and email. You had these review committee members that would have to go and find the applications, download them, go to a master spreadsheet, answer a series of questions, and then send it back to you. Now in Reviewr, they simply click on the name or ID of the applicant they want to review, and they get a split screen. And so it actually shows you in real time a list of all of your applications, the content associated with them. In this case, obviously it is redacted. And then off to the right is your entire selection tool. So this allows your team to very hyper efficiently scroll through the content, answer a series of scorecard questions, which is completely customizable, thumbs up, thumbs down, weighted scoring, algorithms, whatever you can dream of. They can toggle back and forth between the application form. They can look at the file uploads. They can look at any additional forms that were submitted, and they just answer a series of questions. Now, once they're done, we take out all human involvement in tabulating of results. Again, it's time that you don't have. It poses a significant risk for manipulation of data and causing issues. So in Reviewr, once this gets submitted, you actually get this leaderboard. And this kind of goes back to my last slide here, leveraging data. So it'll actually give you a list on a per program, per bucket, per phase basis, every applicant, who reviewed them, how they're individually scored, how they collectively score, and average scores. And so from here, you can start to make some really informed decisions. Maybe this is the results. Maybe you pull this up and your team deliberates. Maybe you take the top 20 and then at the bottom advance into the interview phase, right? So we give you the data of how the selections went on. We at Reviewr don't give you, we don't make decisions for you. We just give you numerous mechanisms to access it and then make your own informed decisions. It's very possible that Richard down here has a really great story that will jump him up above Sheldon or Jordan. That's totally fine. We want to give you this ranking tool. The only other thing I want to kind of address here is, again, we've seen literally everything at Reviewr. And so one of the common trends that we've heard is, okay, well, we want to do randomization, right? We want each individual reviewer to review a certain number of submissions. That typically then implies that not every application is then reviewed by the same people. That poses a big risk in the sense that what happens if you got some committee members or some judges that score higher or lower than average. So in this example, I got Mark, who scored Sheldon 12. So my first question would be, okay, did Mark just score Sheldon low? Or what if Mark has never gotten higher than a 13? So by his own personal standards, he actually scored Sheldon very, very well. However, he is being penalized because other judges are scoring 30s and 40s. So we actually have some pretty cool reports in place, not to get too deep in the weeds, that will actually show you every single applicant, how they were judged on a per question basis. And then this green section shows you individual judging tendencies. So and this is real client data that we redacted. And they basically asked the question, why is it every single year whoever Judge Judy scores never gets selected for a scholarship? Well, the data is pretty clear. She on average scores a full 10 points lower than Tony, who scores a 34. So now that we know this, we can normalize it. So I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds, but this report will basically replace the results and it'll basically create averages. So just because you were scored a 24 by Judge Judy, that's now a 1. That means you were scored completely average. And then the end result is basically comparing each individual judge's averages to one another. So in this example, we have Bruce, our highest rated applicant, who on average scores 1.15 times higher than average, whereas Elon scores 0.83 times lower than average. So again, just kind of reiterating here that there should be a component in Reviewr to power every step of a scholarship with the emphasis on experience. And it goes back to some of those core findings before I go to Q&A. That we oftentimes try to focus how to make our own lives easier. And based off of this study, which I will share back out afterwards, not only are we not making our lives easier, we're also really not prioritizing what we want to. We want to prioritize the experience for the applicants. We want to make our volunteers' lives easier. We want to ensure data security and privacy. But my assumption is because of a lack of tools and processes. Again, it says right in that survey that many of us don't feel that we are even average or lacking in our tech stacks that these items up here are not even realistic for us. So because of that, we want to host this webinar that shows, hey, look, we're here for you. We hear you. We understand that these are things that you want and that you need, and we have all the tools in place to kind of help you cross that finish line. So with all that said, I want to make sure that I leave ample time for question and answers. It could be about the platform. It could be about any other trends that we see. Maybe you want to audit your current scholarship process and ask questions around that. The beauty of what we do at Reviewr is we have tens of thousands of these conversations every year. We have clients in every imaginable industry, from Ivy League universities to major associations to small charitable foundations and trusts. And what seems like very unique processes and workflows really aren't. Application forms, selection processes, all of those are very unique on a per organization basis, but every one of our clients has 3 core consistencies. People are submitting to a program, they're managing it, and then at some point they're going to go through judging, review, and selection. And so again, over the course of a decade, we've seen everything. We have really good access to resources. So if there's anything I can answer about your programs or do for you, now's the time to ask. Question came in about the basic plan. So our pricing is actually adaptive. You must have been on our website. So we have kind of 2 variables that will impact pricing. One is a subscription, which is a little bit dependent upon kind of how you're going to use the platform. And the other is a count of the number of submissions that you receive. So it's a tiered model where basically the number of submissions you receive, as it grows, the price will fall. The goal behind that is that we have a lot of our clients that only have 5 applications and they have to be budget friendly, right? Others have 1,005 submissions and their pricing has to scale with them as they grow. So, we can kind of talk offline about your use of the platform, because that will totally dictate, right? Are you using references? Do you have these crazy triggers? Are you using eligibility criteria? How many submissions do you have? But we can basically plug that into a spreadsheet and it'll kick out the cost for us. But just keep in mind that there's 2 variables. There's a subscription that allows you to use Reviewr for unlimited use, unlimited programs, and then it just counts in real time the number of applications that you receive. So it doesn't alienate small programs, but large programs can grow and scale at an infinite level. Yeah, so great question that just came in around tracking the award acceptance process and then acknowledgement of financials. So Reviewr, from like an accounting and financial perspective, is not involved. Like we would rather work alongside some of the other tools out there that are obviously meant for fund disbursement and accounting purposes. We feel very passionate that you should stay in your lane and do what you do really, really well and leave other things to the experts. From a tracking and an acceptance perspective, that goes back to the supplemental form feature, which I can kind of show you here in this example, where when you open an applicant's profile, you would actually have what I call a supplemental form called acceptance form, right? Or whatever it is. They would then come in here, only those that get accepted. They would click add new. They would fill out, right, whatever the acceptance form is, or maybe it's something that you're logging on their behalf. You're going to log the amount that their scholarship was for, and then it would actually live within their profile. That's critical because it allows you to keep adding to it. You can run reports and access that information, et cetera, all in one centralized hub. So when I hear acceptance, I hear 2 things. One would be the applicants themselves have to fill out like an acceptance form, where the funds are going to be sent to, how they can use the funds, all that kind of fun stuff. And then number 2 is logging how much was actually awarded to them. Those are all things that you can track in Reviewr. The only thing that we can't do is the actual distribution of the funds, right? That's where the accounting softwares come into play. So with that said, since it is pretty quiet, we'll probably wrap things up. We will be sending out a follow-up. So recordings, transcripts, interactive tours, all the things that we kind of chatted about today, any other helpful resources that we think might be beneficial for you. I'm not naive that a lot of people attend these webinars. Obviously, from an information perspective, others might be looking for platforms like Reviewr. So again, I want to make sure that I'm a resource to you guys, whatever I can do for you, whether or not that's auditing a program, or if you want to actually explore how your campaign or how your program would fit within Reviewr, please do let me know. But I really do appreciate your time today, and have a good one.